We find him laying on his back.
He's got numerous gunshot wounds to his body. This was a horrendous crime.
Everybody that met Jimmy loved Jimmy.
He was a basketball coach at the high school. Imagine the number of students, rivals, and players who would have gone through his life over the years. This opens up the floodgates in terms of persons of interest. There's 2 text messages intentionally deleted at about the time of the murder.
Someone trying to cover their tracks.
We'd find a photo of the .40 caliber pistol surrounded by money.
He said he had to, quote, handle his business.
Is this a cash payment to kill Jimmy McClain?
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Cordova, Tennessee, is a quiet suburb on the outskirts of Memphis.
Cordova is close to the center of the Mid-South. The blues, jazz, country music. It's a great, rich, historical part of our country.
Our motto in Cordova is farms, flowers, and fellowship. It's seen itself grow over the years from just a few dozen farms to now currently about 70,000 residents.
It's a upper middle class town with great schools. It's a nice place to call home.
Cordova is a very quiet community and doesn't have a lot of crime.
That changes on a February morning, just before 10 a.m., when the Shelby County Sheriff's Office receives a call from the administrator of a local high school.
The administrators at Ridgeway High School advised that one of the teachers there had not shown up for work over the last couple of days. They asked for deputies of the Shelby County Sheriff's Office to go to the house and perform a welfare check. Upon arrival, officers checked the exterior of the house. They noticed that no windows, no doors were unlocked. Everything appeared to be secure.
As they looked through the window, they noticed a shell casing on the floor. They forced entry into the house.
The deputies found the male subject deceased on the floor with numerous gunshot wounds.
Deputies call in homicide investigators from the Shelby County Sheriff's Office. Jason Valentine is the first to arrive.
As I arrive on the scene, I see the male subject lying there with the large pool of blood around his head and torso. He's got numerous gunshot wounds to his body, head, neck, chest, lower torso. This was a horrendous crime. I find a wallet. I look in the wallet and I find a Tennessee driver's license belonging to Jimmy Fitzgerald McClain.
47-year-old Jimmy McClain is a local high school teacher and basketball coach. He has no children and lives alone. He's lived at his Cordova residence for more than 10 years.
Jimmy was shot 7 times in his head, face, and neck, with 2 shots directly to his face, one of those which became lodged in his chin.
No defensive wounds whatsoever? Jimmy did not see it coming.
When you see multiple gunshot wounds, excessive mutilation with a firearm, there really is only one conclusion to draw, and that's that this was an act of visceral rage.
Investigators search Jimmy's house for clues to what led to this brutal murder.
I'm looking for the sign of a robbery, but all of his cash, his credit cards, everything appears to be intact in his wallet. I determine that it's likely not a burglary, it's likely not a robbery. I notice a cell phone near the body. I collect that, send that off for further testing.
His briefcase and keys were on there, as if Jimmy just got home.
There was no obvious sign of a struggle. Things weren't knocked over.
It was a blitz attack. There's bullet holes everywhere. The walls, the ceiling. There's even one upstairs.
The head stamp on all of the shell casings is a .40 caliber, meaning that they all came from the same caliber of weapon. In total, we find 7 projectiles on the scene that we were able to recover and send to the lab for further forensic examination. I noticed what appears to be muddy footprints leading away from the front door into the living portion of the house. We apply fingerprint dust to the white tile on the front entryway, and we're able to develop numerous sole impressions of footwear on this white tile.
Sheriff's investigators can see the shoe prints also appear to exit through the front door.
We realized that the intruder came through the front door and left out the front door.
So they wonder, how was the front door locked when deputies arrived?
The only way that can happen is if when the killer left, he locked the door behind him. Whoever did this had a key to the house.
Based on the evidence they've seen so far, investigators can now form a narrative of what happened when Jimmy McClain was killed.
Jimmy was immediately alarmed.
The killer just went crazy shooting and didn't stop firing even after Jimmy hit the ground.
Jimmy ended up falling right by the fireplace, where he was shot multiple times thereafter. The suspect finally leaving out through the same door they came in.
Investigators notify Jimmy's next of kin.
At this point in the investigation, I began talking to his sister, Easter.
Easter is devastated by the news of her brother's death.
Easter confirms to us that Jimmy teaches at Ridgeway High School, and he was a basketball coach. Everybody there loves him. Easter confirms to us that he's a pastor of a church as well.
Jimmy was the fourth of 8 brothers and sisters. He earned an MBA and had been a star basketball player at the University of Central Arkansas.
Everybody that met Jimmy loved Jimmy. He made them laugh, feel comfortable. Jimmy was an educated, smart, funny, helpful, humble individual.
To catch Jimmy McClain's killer, investigators will need to reconstruct the last 24 hours of his life. Police found Jimmy's body on Friday, February 22nd at 10 a.m. And administrators at Ridgeway High School tell investigators Jimmy was last seen at work 2 days earlier, on the 20th at 6:30 p.m. The autopsy indicates he was dead at least 24 hours before he was found. That means Jimmy was shot and killed sometime between 6:30 at night, February 20th, to 10 a.m. the next morning. A 15-and-a-half-hour window. Investigators canvass the neighborhood in the hopes that someone saw or heard something that might narrow that wide window.
We were able to speak to a neighbor who told us that 2 days prior, on February the 20th, as he was sitting in his dining room, he heard gunshots at approximately 8:40 p.m.
The neighbor reported it to 911, but when sheriff deputies responded, the neighbor didn't know exactly from where the shots had been fired. Now, investigators believe the shots heard at around 8:40 p.m. must have been the same ones that killed Jimmy. Perhaps Jimmy's phone can confirm it.
In looking at the analytics from the cell phone, we determined that the last communication on the cell phone was a text message at 8:41 p.m. to a female named Catherine. In taking the neighbor's statements about the shots fired, along with the cell phone data, we're able to estimate that the approximate time of death is 8:41 p.m.
Specific time of death for Jimmy. They also know the last person he communicated with, a woman named Catherine.
I asked his sister, Easter, does she know who this person is?
She tells us that Catherine Samuelson is Jimmy's new girlfriend.
Police ask Easter if Catherine has a key to Jimmy's house, and Easter says she believes that she does.
42-year-old Catherine Samuelson has not only been dating Jimmy for the past 6 months, but she likely also has access to his house. So investigators consider her a person of interest.
When it's learned that Jimmy is dating someone new, this person becomes a logical suspect. In 4 out of 5 murder cases, the suspect and victim are known to each other. The intimate partner could be one of the most likely killers.
We contact Catherine, who lives in Nashville, which is a 2.5-hour drive from Memphis, and we ask her to come in to do an interview. Catherine is shocked and upset at Jimmy's death. Catherine advises that she last saw Jimmy 2 weeks ago. tells us that she talked to him the morning of the day of the murder, as usual, and then had several text messages with him throughout the day. She talked to him again after work. He seemed excited about a basketball game his team was about to play, and nothing was out of the ordinary.
At 8:40 p.m., Catherine sent Jimmy a text. 12 seconds later, he responded. And that was the last time she ever heard from Jimmy McLean.
When investigators asked Catherine if there were problems in the relationship, she confessed there were. Jimmy was still married to another woman. He'd been married to Cassie McDowell for 12 years. Catherine says Jimmy and his wife had been separated for 4 years, but something made him reluctant to legally end his marriage.
She felt that Jimmy was dragging his feet on getting a divorce.
Investigators notice the subject is a sore spot with Catherine.
Catherine was uneasy with the friendly relationship Jimmy maintained with his former wife.
The fact that he's dragging his feet could lead to building frustration and resentment that may have boiled over.
Jealousy and love triangles are a top motive for murder. You have to wonder if Catherine's jealousy got the better of her and took a violent turn. Had she been stalking Jimmy and waiting for the right time to strike?
One day after 47-year-old high school teacher and basketball coach Jimmy McLean is found dead in his home outside Memphis, Tennessee, Shelby County.
We asked Catherine if she has a key to Jimmy's house, and she says no, because she's a strict Southern Baptist and she does not stay at his house when she's in town.
The arrangement was Catherine would stay at a hotel when visiting Jimmy until his divorce was finalized, because technically he was still a married man.
Although Catherine says she doesn't have a key to Jimmy's house, she does have a surprising amount of knowledge about Jimmy's routine.
Catherine told us that Jimmy, in his daily habits, was very safety conscious. Jimmy would always back in the garage, let the garage door down before exiting his vehicle, and always come in through the door leading from the garage into the kitchen.
Jimmy was a creature of habit. There was a certain time he took his coat off. There was a certain time he put his attaché case down.
Catherine told us that the bag that we saw at the crime scene, it would be very customary for him to set it down in the living room, where his keys were also found.
Catherine's description matches what investigators found at the crime scene. But it also strikes them as suspicious.
Catherine's details are so exact that we do have to start wondering, since she's telling us that she does not stay at his house, how does she know so many details about what's going on inside the house?
Investigators consider the possibility that Catherine snuck into Jimmy's house and shot him dead. They need to confirm exactly where Catherine was at the time of the murder.
We get a search warrant for Catherine's phone. We discover that at the time that we believe that Jimmy was killed, her phone was pinging in Nashville, Tennessee, some 200 miles away.
We also spoke to a neighbor who confirmed Catherine to be in Nashville during the time of the crime.
With Catherine ruled out as a suspect, sheriff's investigators ask her for names of other people who may have wanted to harm Jimmy and who have a key to his house. Right away, Catherine points the finger at Jimmy's estranged wife, Cassie.
She seems upset. She seems to be taking the murder hard. Cassie informs us that she has been married to Jimmy for 12 years.
Cassie explained to us that at the beginning, Jimmy was very excited to be a step-parent to Cassie's children, Dwayne and Tanya.
But according to Cassie, Jimmy soon conflicted with her and her children.
We learned Jenny and Cassie's parenting styles were different and that Jimmy was very strict.
There are certain things that Jimmy didn't allow in his home. And Cassie was not as strict as Jimmy was. And a lot of the conflict was Jimmy parenting a certain way and Cassie parenting a different way.
Jimmy's disciplined parenting angered Cassie's then 21-year-old daughter, Tanya, and it quickly boiled over.
Cassie told us that because of
her younger brother, 15-year-old Dwayne, also ran afoul of Jimmy's strict rules. And just like his sister, Dwayne was also shown the door.
Jimmy asked Dwayne to move out after catching him smoking weed in his room.
This time, Cassie chose her teenage son over her husband, Jimmy, and she moved out too.
Jimmy and Cassie ended up separating because of that incident.
Cassie explained to us that she harbored no bad feelings against Jimmy, and it was very amicable and they were very friendly.
Cassie says she and Jimmy were getting along fine, but investigators are skeptical about her story when they discover she and Jimmy were fighting over the family home.
Jimmy filed for divorce 10 days before his death. During the divorce, we learned that Cassie wanted to sell the house. However, Jimmy wanted to keep the house himself.
Cassie demanded her share of the money from the house, but Jimmy refused to sell.
Now that Jimmy's dead, not only does she get the house, but she's also the beneficiary of Jimmy's $400,000 life insurance policy.
Financial motive for estranged spouses is right at the top for the reasons people kill. Cassie had a lot to benefit by Jimmy's death.
So we asked Cassie, does she still have the key to Jimmy's house? And she says that if she does, she doesn't know where it is. So now there are reasons to be suspicious. There's financial benefits to Cassie. She's being evasive about the key. Her value as a suspect is starting to rise.
Investigators wonder if Cassie let herself into the house, armed with a handgun, and killed her husband.
We asked Cassie her whereabouts on the night of the 20th. She told us that she went home after she got off work, spoke to her son Dwayne, and went to bed to read.
We asked Cassie if she would let us examine her phone, and she obliged. She said that she had nothing to hide.
Sure enough, Cassie's cell phone records seemed to confirm her story. Around the same time Jimmy was murdered, Cassie's phone pinged off a cell tower near her home, 20 miles from the crime scene. It couldn't have been Cassie who pulled the trigger. But investigators keep pressing Jimmy's ex-wife. She has an alibi. But what about her kids? Tanya and Dwayne had a history of conflict with Jimmy. Did it lead to violence?
We asked Cassie if her kids still have the key to the house, and she says that it's possible, but she doesn't know.
It's been 4 years since Cassie and her kids have lived under the same roof with Jimmy. Tanya is now 25 years old, and on her own with a daughter and boyfriend. Dwayne is 19, and still lives with his mom in Memphis. Dwayne to come in.
We want to talk to Dwayne because we know that he's had a tense relationship with Jimmy in the past.
As the interview started with Dwayne, he was very calm. He answered our questions. He told us everything we needed.
Dwayne insists he got along very well with his stepdad, even though they bumped heads from time to time.
Sheriff's investigators wonder if Dwayne's story is true. Or if 4 years after Jimmy kicked him out, Dwayne still hates his stepdad enough to want him dead. Dwayne says no way.
Dwayne says he harbors no ill will against Jimmy.
We asked Dwayne if he has a key to the house, and he says he doesn't have one, and he has not been to the house in a long time.
We asked Dwayne his whereabouts on the night of the murder. Dwayne tells us that he had gone home, seen his mom, Cassie. They talked briefly, and Dwayne just stayed at the house for the rest of the evening.
Dwayne's mother confirms his story, that on the night Jimmy was murdered, Dwayne came home around 7:30 p.m. He was home at the time of the shooting, and he stayed home the entire night. According to Cassie, there's no way Dwayne could be involved in the crime.
Cassie and Dwayne's stories are lining up, but are they telling the truth? Are they covering for one another?
Just because one person corroborates the alibi of another, investigators have to consider that maybe they're working together, that this is a conspiracy of two.
The team needs to confirm that the data on Dwayne's cell phone will corroborate where he was at the time of the murder.
We asked Dwayne if we could look at his cell phone, and he says he doesn't have one, and that he uses his mother's cell phone when she's not at work.
Since Dwayne shares his mother's phone, investigators already know that at the time of the murder, that phone pinged off a cell tower near their home. The phone's call log also shows no suspicious calls or texts were made during the same time period. It seems like Dwayne was at home with his mom, just like they said. So investigators turn their attention to the other family member who had a conflict with Jimmy. Dwayne's sister, Tanya.
So we bring in Tanya, and she makes no attempt to hide her dislike for Jimmy.
Tanya was especially angry towards Jimmy, so much so she's writing comments about him on social media.
it's been shown that the more we ruminate, the more we're angry about something that we can't control, actually the more it leads to violence. Tanya's on social media writing hateful things about Jimmy, and there's a level of angry rumination there. Investigators may want to know, did this spill over into something violent?
Is it possible that Tanya's nasty comments on social media boiled over?
As the Tennessee homicide case of Jimmy McClain stretches into its third day, sheriff's investigators discover that Jimmy's stepdaughter, Tanya Morrison, made no secret of how she felt about him.
Tanya made no bones about not liking Jimmy. She didn't like him, and she made sure everybody knew it. She went as far as to make comments about him on social media.
The way she explained it, Tanya was upset that Jimmy would treat her more like a coach, being more strict.
She just did not have respect for or want Jimmy telling her what to do. And as much as Jimmy did for her and tried to be nice for her, she just utterly hated Jimmy.
Now we have to wonder, could she possibly be a suspect?
Did Tanya hate Jimmy enough to go to his house, armed with a handgun, and shoot him?
Despite her dislike towards Jimmy, Tanya swears she had nothing to do with his murder. She claims she no longer has a key to his house, and as for her whereabouts on February 20th, she claims she was home with her boyfriend and their small child.
We asked Tanya for her phone, and she agrees to let us look through it.
Results show Tanya was nowhere near Jimmy's house at the time of the shooting.
Tanya's phone pinged at a tower near her house, which was approximately 32 minutes away from Jimmy's house.
Neighbors confirmed Tanya's story. At the time of the shooting, Tanya was at home with her family. She's not Jimmy's killer. As Shelby County investigators search for new leads, funeral services are held for Jimmy McClain, a week after his murder.
Jimmy's funeral was at the Midtown Church of Christ in downtown Memphis. Church was packed. Over 1,000 people were at the ceremony. It was great to see people come out to honor his memory.
Investigators also attend the event. As they reach out to other teachers and students at Jimmy's school, they discover that Jimmy was well loved, but he was also competitive and had rivals.
Jimmy was a very respected, beloved basketball coach. But by dint of that profession, just imagine the number of athletes, students, parents, rival coaches, and players who would have gone through his life over the years. This naturally opens up the floodgates in terms of persons of interest.
While we're talking to students, we do get information that there could be a former student involved in this homicide.
Just before Jimmy's death, a former student had been outed because he was using a fake transcript to go to school where he starred on the basketball team.
Kari Tobamori was masquerading as a 17-year-old high school student.
Kari was actually 22 years old and not
At the school, but Tobamori's scandal got him kicked off the basketball team. His dreams of playing in the NBA squashed, and the team no longer qualified to play at the championship. Maybe Jimmy was the one who tipped off the school administration, being the ethical man that he was, and he got Tobamori kicked off the team.
Investigators find another reason to consider Kari Tobamori a suspect. When they received the forensics on a muddy shoe print found in the entryway to Jimmy's house.
A muddy shoe print was submitted to Nike for identification, and we were informed from Nike that it did have ridge detail that was consistent with an Air Force One, which is the same type shoe that you might find on a basketball player.
They determined that it appears to be somewhere around a size 10.5.
Investigators need to find out where Kari was on the night of the murder. They also want to know what size shoe he wears.
So we contact Kari, and he refuses to talk to us. He lawyers up right away. We reviewed Kari's fake high school transcript and find out that it was submitted by his mother.
When the woman claiming to be Kari's mother arrives at headquarters, investigators are met with a surprise.
We learned that this woman is not actually Kari's mother, it's his wife. Kari's wife explained that they submitted this transcript so that even though he had already had his high school diploma, he would appear to have been 17. That would enable him to pursue a career in the NBA. In other words, they just made up the entire thing.
But sheriff investigators learn it wasn't Jimmy who tipped off the school to the truth about her husband, Kari Tobermory.
In fact, the wife admits it was her that tipped off the school because Tobermory started cheating on her with a high school girl, and this is how she got back at him.
So we talked to Kari. He confirms that he has moved back to Memphis. He has an alibi, and he is cleared as a suspect.
Just as the investigation hits another dead end, investigators receive new information from a local phone carrier regarding the cell phone that both Cassie and her son Dwayne share. Although cell phone tower evidence does show their phone was nowhere near the crime scene on the night of the murder, the call logs from the phone carrier suggest the phone itself may have been tampered with.
We find out that there's a block of time on February the 20th where nothing happens on the phone. We determined that the reason there was nothing on the phone is that communications on the device itself had been deleted.
There's 2 text messages that were intentionally deleted at about the...
Is that someone, Cassie or Dwayne? There's no way to recover the contents of the deleted messages on Cassie's phone. But her phone records do have a valuable piece of information. The phone number the messages were sent to.
We need to see who received these text messages and see if these text messages still exist on that phone.
The phone number is traced to a 19-year-old guy named Rick Collins. Rick is a petty drug dealer known to the sheriff's office. But why did Cassie or Dwayne text him on the night of the murder? And what did they say? Investigators don't want to tip their hand by confronting Cassie and Dwayne, so they follow the lead.
Police now need to track down Rick and gain access to one or more devices in order to determine what role those text messages played during the crime.
We get a warrant for Rick's cell phone, and we put him under surveillance. Within a few hours of surveilling Rick, we approach him, and he takes off running. We have to catch Rick. We can't risk losing whatever information is in that phone.
2 weeks after the murder of Jimmy McClain, Shelby County Sheriff's investigators in Tennessee are hot on the trail of local drug dealer Rick Collins. They want to know if deleted texts sent to him on the day of the murder from the phone belonging to Jimmy's wife Cassie are saved on Rick's phone, and if those text messages point to the killer.
We managed to catch him, and we discovered a large amount of pills and marijuana on him.
Rick refuses to answer any questions and asks for a lawyer.
Rick is placed in jail on his drug charges, and while he's in jail, then we go through his phone.
If investigators find texts linking him to Jimmy's shooting, Rick could also find himself charged with a murder.
Forensic confirms that Rick was texting Cassie's phone on the night of the killing, but we can't look at the text because Rick also deleted the same text messages, so we still don't know what they say.
The destruction of these records is probably more damning than whatever was contained in the message itself. The fact that efforts were undertaken is really incriminating.
With the text messages deleted from both Cassie and Rick's phones, the content of what they said might never be recovered. But investigators do find something on Rick's phone that might prove even more incriminating.
What we did find on the phone is a photo of what appears to be a .40 caliber pistol laying on a bed surrounded by money. And the photo is time-stamped on the day of the murder, February the 20th.
Evidence found at the crime scene indicates that a .40 caliber gun was used to kill Jimmy McClain. If Rick is the one who pulled the trigger, is the gun in the...
We begin to wonder, is this a cash payment that Rick received to kill Jimmy McClain?
If investigators can find that gun in the photograph, it might point them to the killer. They search Rick's apartment, but find no trace of the gun or the money. If Rick is the shooter, without the deleted texts, cash, or the gun, investigators have no evidence to prove it.
So while Rick is in jail, we begin to monitor his phone calls in the hopes that he will trip himself up and reveal more clues about what happened.
The break they're looking for comes on March 8th. 3 weeks after Jimmy's murder, Rick makes a call from jail to a known criminal named Javert. In the recorded call, investigators overhear a coded message between the two men.
During the conversation, Rick told Jabir, I wish I would have known that night that the pit bull was sick. Pit bull is slang for gun. Sick means it was used in a crime and that he needs to get rid of it.
From the call, investigators learned that Rick sold the gun to Jabir just days after Jimmy McClain was shot dead. If Jabir still has the gun, investigators need to find it before he has time to get rid of it.
We jump on that and get a search warrant for Jabir's house.
In the closet of Jabir's bedroom, in a shoebox, we found a Smith & Wesson Sigma handgun. The Smith & Wesson handgun was sent for forensic examination, where it was determined that that handgun was the gun that fired the rounds that killed Jimmy McClain on February the 20th, 2013.
4 weeks after Jimmy's death, investigators have found the murder weapon, but they still need evidence to prove who pulled the trigger and who else may have been involved.
We have to link Rick, Jabir, Cassie, Dwayne. All of these have to be put together now.
As investigators work to connect the dots, a sheriff's deputy from a town that's 400 miles away blindsides the team in Shelby County.
We receive a tip from Deputy Green in Crossville, Tennessee, that at 11 p.m., a frightened woman runs into the sheriff's office. She tells them that her husband's nephew is involved in a murder involving a basketball coach in Memphis, and she is afraid for both her and his life.
Investigators need to talk to the frightened woman's husband to find out what he knows.
So we find out that she is married to David Caddell. Right away, we drove to Crossville, Tennessee to interview Caddell.
As Shelby County investigators travel to meet David Caddell, they have no idea if he's a false lead or a witness who's about to name the killer of Jimmy McClain. 400 miles to Crossville, Tennessee.
She was actually alive when she was set on fire.
You've got a gruesome homicide, one of the worst killings ever seen.
Even though she was 23 years old, she has more of a mentality of a teenager.
She's very friendly, she's very trusting.
She may have been taken advantage of.
He was controlling, jealous, manipulative.
He's also a very violent person.
He even said that he would have to be killed to keep them apart.
We have a very, very strong suspicion who it is that has committed this homicide, and now it's time to go after them.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Just 75 miles north of Philadelphia, Robsonia, Pennsylvania, is a peaceful, family-friendly borough.
Roxonia is a small, tight-knit community of about 2,000 people. It's rural, it's working class, it's got a lot of farmland in the area.
It is very quiet. You don't have the crime or some of the other problems that you see in some of the more populated areas.
The people who live in the borough are very community-oriented, I would say. It is an ideal place to raise a family.
Because the population is so small, the people that live there do know each other well.
As dawn stirs the sleepy hamlet on the first day of 2014, one worried father calls police for help.
Michael Klein called us to say that his daughter Ashley was missing. She hadn't been seen since about 10 o'clock in the evening on December 30th. He was very concerned and reported her missing.
We respond to the Klein household immediately. We interview Michael there.
Mike explains that his daughter did not show up at a New Year's Eve party that was hosted by her best friend.
He was calling Ashley's cell phone and he wasn't getting any response.
He's very distressed that his daughter hasn't shown back up because normally she would let him know where she was, what she was doing. She was not very secretive.
It's of 23-year-old Ashley Klein. Leading the case are Detectives Eric Schaefer and Raymond Guth of the Pennsylvania State Police.
It was unusual to receive a call of this type for a 23-year-old. Ashley experienced lead poisoning as a small child, so due to that she had some diminished cognitive functions, which, even though she was 23 years old, she has more of a mentality of a teenager.
So Michael is definitely concerned, given his daughter's loving and trusting nature, that she may have been taken advantage of.
Detectives asked the worried father about his daughter's whereabouts before she disappeared.
Michael tells the detective that his daughter left the residence at around 10 p.m. on the 30th of December, 2 days earlier.
She walked past him in the living room. They had a brief interaction. He noticed she was wearing her favorite boots, her pajama pants, and a sweatshirt with a jacket. Michael tells us that Ashley was supposed to show up at her friend Lainey's house on the 30th, spend most of the day with her on the 31st, and set up for a New Year's Eve party. Ashley never showed up. We want to do everything we can to try to find Ashley and bring her back home to her family.
While patrols look for Ashley throughout Robizonia, investigators ask her network for clues to her whereabouts.
We start contacting anybody that would know where she is or where she might have gone on December 30th.
Investigators call on Ashley's boyfriend, 28-year-old Wade Donahue, to come in and answer some questions.
They've been dating for a number of months at this time, and he's concerned that he hasn't heard from her.
Wade tells them that they have a very good relationship. They're very happy together.
He communicates with Ashley routinely through the week. However, he only sees her mainly on the weekends because he works long hours in a pizzeria.
Investigators ask Wade about his last interactions with Ashley before she went missing.
Wade gave Ashley an early Christmas present, a necklace. It had their names engraved on it. It was in the shape of a heart.
Ashley was so excited about this, she posted a picture of the pendant on her social media the day she received it.
Wade tells us that the last time he actually saw Ashley in person was December 28th. And he last spoke with Ashley on December 30th. They were communicating via text message.
And he's been trying to reach her for the last 2 days. So at this point, we don't have anything that raises suspicion about Wade. We need to start looking in a new direction.
So investigators turn to another young man who knew Ashley well.
We contact one of Ashley's oldest friends, 19-year-old Ryan Schoenauer.
Ryan and Ashley's mothers were best friends, and the two kids had actually grown up together.
Ryan tells us that their parents even joked that one day they might even get married because of the amount of time they spent together growing up.
So we asked Ryan, when's the last time you saw Ashley?
Ryan tells us that he picks up Ashley in front of her house on December 30th around 10 p.m. Says they go back to his house, they watch a movie together.
Ashley was distracted. She wasn't really paying attention to the movie. She was more interested in her phone. And she was texting somebody on the phone continuously.
Approximately an hour after they start the movie, Ashley asks him to drive her home, that she needs to go home. And he's curious as to why, but he says that he consents to do this.
About a block away from her home, she asked to be let out of the car.
So we asked him, what do you know about this? Who's she meeting? Why is she getting dropped off before she goes home? And he said he didn't know. This is what Ashley wanted to do.
Ryan said the last time he saw Ashley was she got out of his car and she walked into the neighborhood. So investigators are extremely interested in Ryan's story because he is now the last person to see Ashley since she actually disappeared.
Being the last person to see the victim would elevate Ryan to the top of the list of suspects.
Ashley is a young lady in her 20s with the mental capability of someone much younger. And it's late in the evening. What is he thinking doing this? Ryan Schonauer becomes suspicious at this point.
In the mysterious disappearance of 23-year-old Ashley Klein, Pennsylvania investigators learned that her childhood friend, Ryan Schonauer, was the last person to see her on December 30th, 2013.
Ryan tells the investigators that Ashley asked him to drive her home before the movie was finished. So they got into his car and he headed back towards her house. When they got into the neighborhood, she asked that he stopped the car and she got out.
He adds that after he dropped her off, he actually continued to be in a text message conversation with her and showed us that he was in.
Ryan tells the investigators that he spent the rest of the evening at his friend's house and then he drove home. But on his way home, Ryan's car broke down.
He calls his mother for assistance. She was working nearby at the time, so she leaves her job. She meets with Ryan, and they arrange for a tow truck to tow the vehicle back to their house, and that occurs around 1 a.m. on December 31st. Ryan was very cooperative, answered everything we asked of him, said if he learns anything else that he would give us a call.
Three days after Ashley went missing, detectives receive a call from a neighboring town.
A jogger calls police to tell them that she's found some items of concern in Adamstown, Pennsylvania.
Adamstown is just 10 miles south of Ashley's home in Robisonia.
We arrive at the scene and we observe a pink boot, an empty cell phone case, a black and gray Philadelphia Phillies baseball cap. We go back to Michael Klein and his family and see if they can make sense or recognize any of these items. Michael Klein believes that the pink boot is consistent to a pair that Ashley owned, and most likely consistent to the pair he remembers her walking out of the house with on December 30th. He is also shown the cell phone case. He believes that that is also consistent with what he remembers of his daughter's cell phone. The one article that they do not attribute to Ashley is the Philadelphia Phillies ball cap.
Michael has no idea whose hat that might be. And, of course, now, finding these items, it becomes even more of a concern that something bad may have happened to her. And now we're trying to put the pieces together.
Just 10 days after Christmas, Ashley's family is forced to consider whether they'll ever see her alive again. To answer that question, investigators return to Adamstown, where Ashley's belongings were recovered.
We begin to search the area, and there's a wastewater treatment plant right there. And it's got a high fence. And inside the fence, you have a water treatment pond. And there's a grassy area.
There's a sock in the water, and there's a sock outside the retention pond. So whoever discarded these items most likely threw them in an attempt to throw them in the water to conceal them.
Would have had on when she disappeared on the night of December 30th. These items are collected and they're taken into evidence.
The issue with the tanks for us is that the water is gray water. You can't see through it. It's wintertime. It's cold. It's a possibility that other items are concealed in the water. And it's possible that even a body could be concealed in the water. We make a request that the retention pond tanks are all drained, and we have our forensics team analyze everything that's left behind.
When the tanks are drained, thankfully Ashley's body is not found at the bottom. But detectives do find something else.
In one of the tanks that they've drained, they find a keychain with a charm attached to it. They show this charm to Ashley's family, and they confirm that this was Ashley's. All they have to hang on to is their hope at this point.
But 10 days later, detectives get a grim tip that threatens what little hope remains.
It's 2 weeks since Ashley's been reported missing. I get a call saying that 2 hikers were hiking in Middle Creek Wildlife Preserve and came up to an area where there was some burned brush and things. They walked the trail towards what they thought was a campfire, and as they get within 12 feet, they realize there's a severely burned body.
So they called 911 naturally, and we immediately dispatched a forensic team.
I'm thinking the worst. It's unusual for a body to be found, much less 2 weeks after a girl that's been reported missing. The brush around the body has been burned. The clothing around the body has mostly been burned off, and there's serious trauma to the body itself. Based on the condition of the body, we are not able to identify if this is Ashley Klein or not.
One of the things that we find on the body is a badly burnt boot that is very similar to the boot that we found at the waste treatment center close by there.
To confirm whether the remains are Ashley's, investigators must now ask Ashley's father for her dental records.
In my career, that's probably the most crucial conversation I ever had with somebody. To knock on their door, look them in the eye, and not be able to tell them we found his daughter, but then turn around and ask for, when I think for the family, all hope is pretty much lost.
Dental records confirm the burned remains are Ashley Klein's.
It's not every day that you see something this heinous take place.
People want answers, and we're the ones responsible for providing those answers, so there is a lot of pressure.
Once it's been confirmed that this is Ashley's body, the investigation takes on a new meaning. Now you've got a homicide. The pace of the investigation actually picks up.
Based on evidence investigators have so far, they formulate an initial theory of what likely occurred to Ashley.
We received the results of the autopsy. She was physically assaulted, beaten. Ashley was stabbed 5 times. And then she was doused with a petroleum accelerant and set on fire. There's burning on the body, mostly around the pelvic region, which made us suspicious of sexual assault. However, forensically, there was no way for us to prove that that happened, as the intensity of the fire destroyed any type of physical evidence that could have been discovered in the area. There was the presence of soot in Ashley's lungs, which indicated that she was actually alive when she was set on fire.
You've got a gruesome homicide, one of the worst killings that many of the investigators have ever seen or had to investigate. It's really a horror story in its own right.
2 weeks after 23-year-old Ashley Klein went missing from her Robisonia, Pennsylvania home, investigators recover her charred remains just 10 miles from where she grew up. Detectives suspect the homicide of the mentally challenged but loving young woman was sexually motivated.
It's a tragic case and also a sad commentary on society. Here you have a young girl possibly looking for love and to feel a sense of belonging, only to have that used against her and murdered.
To solve the mystery of Ashley Klein's murder, detectives will need to reconstruct the last 24 hours of her life. They circle back to Ryan Chanauer, the last known person to see Ashley alive.
We look at the timeline that Ryan Chanauer told us, where he says he dropped her off. And of course, he showed us text messages from Ashley on his phone up until 1 o'clock after he left.
Based on Ryan's story, detectives estimate Ashley was murdered sometime between 11 p.m. on December 30th, when she was last seen alive, and the early hours of the morning of December 31st. Now investigators take a closer look at 19-year-old Ryan.
Most of those who are killed, unfortunately, are killed by those who know them. Ryan is one of Ashley's oldest and closest friends, so it raises red flags for sure.
Detectives now consider if Ashley Klein was murdered by her lifelong friend, Ryan Schanauer. When they interviewed Ryan in his home 2 weeks earlier, was he telling the truth?
Our goal is to corroborate Ryan's story, to make sure that all the details that he gave us in the first interview check out, that he was with the friends he said he was with, that his vehicle did get towed to the place they said it was towed to.
When we speak with Ryan's mom, she does corroborate the fact that his car broke down and that she arranged for the tow truck. And she also tells us who it was that towed the vehicle and where the vehicle was towed to and where it is now.
And at this point, everything checks out with Ryan's story.
Ryan Schanauer's alibi is airtight. Detectives eliminate him as a suspect.
Investigators have to look for something else. They have to look for another lead.
We turn our attention to Wade Donahue, Ashley's boyfriend, again. We wanted to go to Wade's workplace to see when he was working, what his schedule was, and discover that Wade was not at work on December 30th.
Wade didn't call to say he wasn't coming in. He just never showed up, and he didn't come back to work until December 31st at 12 p.m.
Suddenly, Wade is the detective's prime suspect.
We're concerned enough to go back to the Klein family and ask for some clarity of the relationship and how they felt about Wade. We learned some things that were, again, problematic. We learned more about who Wade Donahue really is and became even more concerned with his background. Wade was controlling, a bit jealous, maybe even manipulative of Ashley.
Ashley's brother tells us that the day after Ashley is last seen, which is December 31st, Wade shows up at the Klein residence and insists that he has to use Ashley's computer. Wade logs on to the computer and changes Ashley's password, gets on her social media account, and proceeds to go through it.
Learning this information made it obvious to us that there were some issues in the relationship between Wade and Ashley, that there were some control issues, some trust issues, and that maybe not everything was the way he wanted it to seem.
So now he's got more to explain. Is he telling us the truth about what he knows? And did Wade Donahue murder Ashley Klein?
"28-year-old Wade Donahue was possessive of Ashley and lied about showing up for work at the pizzeria on December 31st, the day after she went missing.
His boss speaks very highly of him. He's very reliable, except for this one time.
Detectives bring Wade in again for more questioning, this time on suspicion of murder.
He was very cooperative.
He admits that he did not show up for work at the pizzeria on December 31st, as he was supposed to. He just decides he doesn't want to go to work, doesn't call in. He just didn't feel like it and didn't feel that he had to let anyone know. He needs to come up with an alibi, and he actually does. Wade tells us his brother came over and they were playing video games, and sometime around 10 p.m. his brother leaves. He tells us that he went to bed then. One of the problems with his story is that he has no alibi whatsoever from the time his brother leaves around 10 p.m. on the 30th till he arrives at his shift at 12 p.m. the next day at the pizzeria.
Detectives ask Wade why he logged into Ashley's social media the day after she went missing.
When we press him as to why he was on her computer, what he says is that he's frustrated, he's scared, he wants to know what happened to her, and the only way he can think of is to get on her computer and see who she's had contact with. Wade claims that he found numerous conversations with men that he didn't recognize, And when he sees this, he feels that he needs to block these people from speaking with her. Wade's perspective in all this, he knows that Ashley's naive, and he feels that he's protecting her. When we ask him why he wasn't upfront about this, basically he's embarrassed, and he didn't want to cause suspicions as to what he was doing. He didn't want to make himself a suspect. And
Wade was still very suspicious to us. However, he provided some interesting information of things that we should investigate. When he looked in the computer, he found a conversation that Ashley was having with another individual, which could be a person of interest. Wade made us aware that she was having a conversation with an individual named Blake Kalka-Fuoka. Blake Kalka-Fuoka is in his mid-20s, from out of town. Ashley's family doesn't recognize his name, and there's a lot of question marks around how he knew Ashley. We looked into his background and discovered he had arrests for burglary, theft, and of most concern to us was an arrest for sexual assault.
Ashley's father searches Ashley's room, and he finds hidden away in a corner love letters to Ashley that are written by Blake. In these letters, Blake shows great love for Ashley. He even says that he would have to be killed to keep them apart.
It was shocking to discover that the love letters were sent from Columbia County Prison, which is about 65 miles from Ashley's home.
Michael Klein tells the investigators that he believes that this relationship started through a prison pen pal program that was organized by their church.
we discovered that he was actually released from prison several days before Ashley's disappearance. And we find that Ashley and Blake actually communicated on December 30th, the day that she disappears. This heightens the imperative to find out just where he was.
Experienced sexual predators have an intuitive radar for potential victims. They know that these people can be easily manipulated and dominated.
On examining the letters, it looks like Blake was absolutely obsessed with Ashley. Obsession can be unhealthy.
Two weeks after the brutal murder of 23-year-old Ashley Klein, her killer remains at large. Detectives learn that she was corresponding with 26-year-old Blake Kalka-Fuoka, a violent sex offender who was released from prison just days before she was murdered. Detectives set out to find him.
We tracked down Blake to Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, which is about a 2-hour drive from Ashley's hometown. And we bring him in for questioning. The amount of love that he expressed for Ashley was super alarming for someone who was just a prison pen pal. So we wanted to get to the bottom of who Blake Kalka-Fuoka actually was.
Blake tells us that he wrote these letters to pass his time in prison, and he never actually met Ashley in person, nor had he ever been down to her residence. Blake's behavior is concerning, maybe a little bizarre, that he's said some of the things that he's said. And so now, of course, what we need to find out is if he had the ability to be involved in her disappearance.
Detectives asked Blake for his whereabouts the night of December 30th, when he last communicated with Ashley on social media before she disappeared.
Blake tells us that the night Ashley disappeared, he was in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania with a friend, and he bizarrely tells us that he has no way to contact his friend to prove his alibi.
He's telling us he wasn't in the Robisonia area. We have nothing to put him there. We can't even find a means for him to get down there as to a vehicle that he would even have access to.
Despite Blake's criminal history, we have no way to link him to Ashley's hometown. We have no way to link him to Ashley's disappearance. We have no way to link him to Ashley's murder.
Just like everybody else they've spoken to, there's no evidence to hold Blake. The investigators are getting frustrated at this point, so they have to go back and start from scratch.
Hoping to find something they may have overlooked, investigators re-examine the evidence retrieved from the water treatment plant in Adamstown and from the crime scene in the woods.
We had to look at the physical evidence, things that were dumped around Adamstown, and what that could mean for Ashley's disappearance and murder.
One thing that we know is that an accelerant was used on her body. That accelerant is coming from somewhere. We start to take a look at all the stations in the vicinity to see if anybody had purchased some gas or some type of petroleum substance in a container around the time of Ashley's murder.
The results of our request was extensive. We've obtained hundreds of transactions of fuel, hours and hours of surveillance, and we had to sift through all this new information.
One piece of footage gets the investigators' attention.
There's surveillance film of one man visiting a gas station about 10 miles away from the crime scene.
What caught our eye was gasoline that was not put into a vehicle. It was put into a small gasoline carrier, get out, and put his jacket back on.
There's a few reasons that someone would turn your jacket inside and out. One of them would be to not be identified.
The timing of where this purchase was located and the bizarre actions of this individual made us determine that this is someone we want to identify.
When it's zoomed in on, what really stands out is that the individual's wearing a black Phillies hat, very similar to the one that is found in Adamstown.
Detectives don't just identify the Phillies baseball cap. They identify the man wearing it.
We're actually able to identify the man as 21-year-old Adam Lynch. This is the single biggest break for the case.
We'd look at Adam Lynch's criminal history and discover that he had multiple arrests all the way through his juvenile and adult years that included assault, theft, drug possession charges, as well as a charge of criminal battery.
He's a person who has not only spent a lot of time in jail, it becomes apparent he's also a very violent person.
We interview Adam Lynch, and we ask him what he was doing on the evening of December 30th.
What he tells us is that he had nothing to do with Ashley Klein, and it must just be a coincidence that he was getting gas at this gas station, and he doesn't understand why it is that we're even talking to him about this. We don't believe him, and we're not going away. He needs to be a bit more upfront with us.
Adam was nervous during the interview, tapping his foot, tapping his hand on the chair, spinning back and forth in the chair, clearly withholding information.
We don't give up and keep questioning him, confronting him with the Phillies baseball cap in particular, as well as the gas can. And eventually Adam changes his story and says, okay, I still didn't have anything to do with it, but I know who did it.
In the murder of 23-year-old Ashley Klein, 20-year-old Adam Lynch tells detectives he has something to confess.
What we have is Adam Lynch claiming that he had nothing to do with Ashley's murder, but he can tell us who did. And he comes right out and tells us, well, it was Ryan Schanauer.
Ryan Schanauer is Ashley's lifelong friend, and the last person to see Ashley the night she disappeared.
Adam tells us that Ryan went to Ashley's house, kidnapped her, and killed her.
Adam claims that he only found out about her being killed when Ryan really doesn't make a lot of sense, because we already...
It's one of the most horrific scenes I think I've ever walked into. There's missing body parts. There was the axe mark on her head. Who did this?
Harry did have a lot of enemies in town.
The neighbor could hear loud fights and screaming matches between the two of them.
While we're searching the property,
We see a truck. We shovel some of the snow away. And there in the bed of the truck is a bloodied body. He's frozen solid.
If the body's thawed too quickly, valuable evidence can be lost.
I'm very worried that there is a deranged killer on the loose at this point.
things like this don't happen in Ethelbert.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Stretching 5,500 miles across North America, the U.S.-Canadian international border is the longest and most peaceful in the world. And right in the middle lies tiny Ethelbert, Manitoba, 300 residents living 300 miles north of Minnesota.
Ethelbert is extremely rural. It is the heart of the prairies.
The people tend to all know who each other are, and it's places that are passed down from family to family, so there's lots of related people within the community.
There's a lot of beef industry there. There's grain farming.
There's also quite a bit of tourism in the area because of the fishing and the hunting.
There aren't a lot of problems or disputes that become a criminal issue.
On most winter days in Ethelbert, the temperature stays well below freezing and nothing much happens. But January 19th, 2013 is not like most winter days.
The Ethelbert mayor called the RCMP detachment to check in on the well-being of one of his people.
Royal Canadian Mounted Police Sergeant Laura Ledrew responds to the call.
The mayor asked our team for a report of a well-being check on a resident of Ethelbert, Elsie Stepa, who is an elderly lady. It's been 4 weeks since anyone has seen her.
There's been no smoke or heat coming out of the chimney, and there are 2 dogs known to be in that house, but they haven't been seen either in the last 2 weeks.
The mayor was calling to see if someone could possibly go check on her at her residence.
This is a brutally cold morning. The temperature is minus 40 degrees.
At that temperature, exposed team of Mounties arrive at the Stepa farmhouse.
There's no sign of anything happening. We open the door, it's slightly ajar, which seems suspicious. So, at this point, we don't know what we're going into. In the house, it's dark, there's no electricity, it's very, very, very cold. There's no sign of anyone. At first, I don't actually know what to think. I've never seen a residence that looked like this. The house is completely full. It's a hoarder's house. Items stacked every which way. There were stacks of DVD players, VCR players, and cords hanging everywhere, batteries everywhere.
In the living room of Elsie's house, there's a makeshift altar and a whole load of religious artifacts.
We don't know where Elsie Stepa is. That's our main concern right now. We see some blood, a couple droplets here and there, which is obviously never a good thing, and make our way to this door that's closed, where we can hear the dogs barking. We try to open the door, but it was jammed on something, so we had to really force our way in.
Officers need to know if anyone is behind the door with the dogs.
One of the members found a hammer, and he was going to use the hammer to sort of bash the door to get us in. And that's when we noticed on the head of the hammer was some gray hairs, looked like human hairs, and blood. We were able to finally get the door open. We noticed there's another door that looks to be made from a chain link fence. We push the door open, and these 2 dogs come running out, and they just ran outside. That was a moment of terror. When we get into the room, it's one of the most horrific scenes I've ever walked into. There is a body lying on the floor, face down. I'm making an assumption at this point that it is Elsie Stepa. The injuries to the head were something I've never seen before. There's an ice axe located under her head. There is a hole in the back of the head. There was multiple cracks on the skull. She had her neck completely slit. There's no hair on the head. There's an ear missing. There is half of an arm missing and another complete arm missing. I see a tiny drywall saw, which are very, very, very sharp, and that is covered in blood as well. The hammer that we just about used matched the size of the hole in the back of her head.
The officers are able to find her identification in her purse, in the room, and there's no doubt about it, this is Elsie Steppa.
81-year-old Elsie Steppa, who lived peacefully on her Ethelbert farm most of her life, is now the victim of a brutal homicide.
She's completely frozen, and that's obviously due to the temperatures outside, but she's inside, and there's no heat in that house. I've never seen anything like this. And now we have to start the hard work of figuring out what happened.
Sergeant Ledrew calls in the Mounties experts to help her sift through the evidence.
Our forensics team begins to bag all of the items. I'm looking through the room with all the clothing, and most of the clothing is old, tattered, but I do see kind of a sportier ski jacket. It stands out because it's not underneath this pile, it's sort of on top, and potentially recently put there. We seized that as well.
Based on what investigators have seen so far, they pieced together an initial sequence of what may have happened to Elsie Steppa.
In a small community like Ethelbert, most people probably don't lock their doors. Is it someone that she might know and let in the house? At this point, I'm now thinking maybe she was attacked in the living room. Did they drag her then into the bedroom and then hit her in the back of the head with the hammer and then slit her throat with the drywall saw? And I'm staring at her, the missing limbs, and I'm thinking the worst things possible. I'm very worried that there is a deranged killer on the loose at this point.
Elsie's body is taken to the morgue, where her body is allowed to thaw out under controlled situation.
To solve the mystery of Elsie Steppa's murder, detectives need to reconstruct the last 24 hours of her life.
We started to talk to everybody in Ethelbert.
RCMP Constable Stan McCutcheon joins the investigation.
Several people in Ethelbert report seeing her on December 22nd, maybe 4 weeks before her body was found, going to the store in town and buying food.
I speak with the local store owner of the one shop in town, and he confirms that she hasn't been here for about 4 weeks.
Investigators estimate that Elsie was killed sometime between December 22nd, when she was last seen buying groceries, and January 19th, firm her time of death. Investigators gather background on Elsie to find out who may have wanted to hurt her.
One concerned neighbor, Natalie Panto, goes on to describe Elsie as a recluse, someone who doesn't really leave her house, friendly and pleasant enough.
And she tells us Elsie has never been married, and she has no children. And around town, she's known as the Cat Lady, because at one point in the not-too-distant past, she had 20 cats living in her house.
The sergeant asks Natalie if she can think of anyone who might want to harm Elsie.
Natalie mentions that Elsie actually does live with her nephew, a man by the name of Harry Jones, about 50 years old.
According to Natalie, Jones is well known in the community and generally disliked.
Natalie describes Jones as aggressive and impulsive.
I learn that he suffers from schizophrenia and that he's delusional. He has been banned from going to any church because he causes disturbances and questions the priest in the middle of the services and tends to be very disruptive.
Elsie and Harry live in a house without heat, and they live in a house without running water. Neither one of them has a job, and they just manage to scrape by.
The neighbor also speaks about loud fights. She could hear loud fights and screaming matches between the two of them.
The neighbor reports hearing a vicious argument not long before she was murdered.
Harry wanted Elsie to get rid of all of her cats, and he wanted to keep his 2 dogs that were very aggressive and not well liked in the community, and that the 2 of them would argue loudly about this.
So Harry ends up winning that argument, and the cats are taken away by animal protection units.
Elsie's nephew, Harry Jones, is the RCMP's #1 suspect.
Natalie then says she hasn't seen Harry for probably about 4 weeks, and Elsie about the same amount of time, and she also hasn't seen the dogs running around outside.
We start looking for Harry Jones immediately. We want to find him. We want to arrest him.
Maybe Harry Jones is our suspect. Maybe he's the one who killed his aunt.
Just hours after Canadian police in Manitoba find 81-year-old Elsie Stepa murdered and frozen in her hoarder home, Elsie's cantankerous 50-year-old nephew, Harry Jones, becomes the #1 suspect.
We are in that house, and at no time does Harry Jones show up to ask us what we are doing.
But investigators keep digging into his background. They need to find out more.
Mental health issues, and he's been hostile to his Aunt Elsie.
Police fan out searching for Harry's last known whereabouts.
We start to search the town of Ethelbert.
There's no sign of Harry there. We hear the same story repeatedly, that Harry is a thief. He's a petty thief. That's how he survives. It's not just stealing food. He's been caught breaking into some of the closed churches in the area and stealing things. And basically, nobody trusts him around their property. Nobody wants him around them.
All these religious items at the house, these items belong to local community members, and they were stolen.
We run Harry Jones through the police databases that we have, and he does not have a criminal record, which is unusual given everything we've learned about him.
Then investigators get a tip.
We received a phone call from one of the people in the community telling us that they had seen Harry Jones driving his pickup truck. It was a silver Chevy Silverado. He was driving around Ethelbert just 3 days before we were asked to go look and see if Elsie was okay.
2 days after Elsie's body is discovered, police return to her property to make sure they didn't overlook anything under the junk piles inside her home, or in the snowbanks outside it.
As we're searching the property, there's a couple of sheds in the backyard. We search those, and we see a truck parked quite a ways back behind the house. Silver Chevy Silverado, so maybe it's Harry's truck. Upon approaching it, there's no footprints around this truck saying that it's been driven recently or anything like that. The bed of the truck is full of snow, and you can see a couple of wooden pallets or crates in there. We shovel some of the snow away, lift the pallets up, and there in the bed of the truck is a bloody body. It's the body of Harry Jones. He's frozen solid to the base of the truck. He's got numerous head injuries. I can see that there's pieces of his skull lying in the bed of the truck. And very similar to the body of Elsie Stepa, his throat has been slit.
It's a double tragedy for tiny Ethelbert.
The fact that Harry isn't our killer makes things even more concerning, because now I have somebody in this community that's killed 2 people and hasn't been found yet.
For investigators, the state of how and where Harry's body is found tells them a slightly different story than the story of his aunt's homicide.
There's a little bit of blood in the bed of the truck, but not a huge amount.
Then his body was thrown on the back of the truck.
And then our killer drove back to Harry and Elsie's house.
We start to search the area right beside the truck, keeping in mind there's no footprints, there's no activity around this truck at all. We used a metal detector, and lo and behold, our officer found a large wooden-handled axe, typical axe that you'd use for cutting wood. And there was blood on the head of the axe, which was very consistent with a couple of the injuries that we could see.
Police continue their search for any other secrets the truck may hold.
They check out the inside of the truck. They swab the steering wheel for DNA.
I noticed that there's a paper coffee cup in the cup holder right beside where the driver would be. We decided to swab the lid for any possible DNA of maybe someone that isn't Harry or Elsie.
Investigators send the swabs and coffee lid to the lab for analysis. They also bag Harry's remains to join Aunt Elsie's at the morgue.
Just like Elsie Steppa, it's impossible to determine when Harry Jones was killed because his body is frozen solid. If the body's thawed too quickly, valuable evidence can be lost. An approximate time of death, fingerprints, and even a cause of death can be distorted and destroyed.
On January 24th, investigators receive autopsy results for both Harry and his Aunt Elsie.
The medical examiner provided insight into the injuries on Elsie Steppa. Her limb from her shoulder down was missing, and her other arm was half missing. The hair missing on her head, the ear missing, that was due to the dogs that were locked in the room with her, with no food. The hole in the back of her head, that was from the hammer that was found with the blood and her hair on it. She was probably attacked from behind, hit in the head with a hammer. Harry Jones' body, very similar, very violent head injuries with the skull breaking. And then the throat again slit to the spinal cord. Who wants these two people dead this badly that they would then, in addition, slit their throats?
Harry's skull has been fragmented. Our medical examiner thinks that this is from being struck in the head several times with a heavy, blunt object.
The autopsy results shows that they both died of blunt force trauma.
The coroner's exam also helps detectives form a timeline.
The homicides occurred within the previous 4 weeks.
It's a finding that matches up with what locals told the detectives about the last time they
saw Harry driving his truck 3 days before the police were called and the police descended on that house. This makes no sense to me whatsoever.
The mystery deepens when investigators receive Harry's prints from the morgue.
They were run through our national police system, and the person that we know as Harry Jones was actually a male by the name of Clarence Harold Thornton. I learned that Clarence Harold Thornton, aka Harry Jones, is a wanted criminal from Ontario for a crime he committed over 20 years ago, where he stole an item from a big box store. He resisted arrest, causing the police officer to break their arm.
Police now believe that the man who used the alias Harry Jones relocated to Manitoba with his Aunt Elsie to escape charges in Ontario, 1,500 miles away.
The neighbors tell us that they arrived in Ethelbert about 18 years ago.
We find out that Elsie is originally from Ethelbert and was born and raised there and had left. And when she came back with her nephew, Harry. The two of them fit into the community. There didn't seem to be a lot of problems. But as Harry's mental health issues became more and more prominent, there were more and more problems with the people in the community.
Harry was involved in so many disputes with different people within the community that Elsie probably got caught up in one of these disputes, and that was the reason that she was killed.
But the killer, or killers, of Elsie Steppa and her nephew Harry remain elusive. Investigators get a clue when they receive DNA results from the swabs taken in Harry's truck.
We learn that there is DNA that's not Harry, and it's not Elsie's. This is a profile of an unknown male.
The DNA that's found in that swab is compared against the Canadian National Data Bank of known offenders, and it cannot be identified. So at this point, we don't know whose DNA that is.
It could belong to the person who killed both Elsie Steppa and her nephew Harry.
So now we begin to focus on Clarence Thornton, aka Harry Jones. Who does he associate with? What does he do? And who in his life may have wanted to kill him?
After Royal Canadian Mounted Police find 81-year-old Elsie Steppa and her 50-year-old nephew Harry murdered and frozen at Elsie's home in tiny Ethelbert, Manitoba, police learn that Harry had a criminal record and a secret life.
We continued our efforts to talk to everybody in Ethelbert about Harry's lifestyle.
Neighbors say that Harry regularly went dumpster diving, looking for something to salvage.
He confirms that Harry and a couple of other people were always looking for items to pawn. Marcus says they never stole anything from anyone. It was harmless. Marcus readily admitted, though, that him and Harry would often have fights and arguments about who got the most money, but nothing out of the ordinary. Now he starts to mention that there's another person in their group who Harry had conflict with. He said, Harry and I are fine, but the other guy in our group, not so much. He mentions the name Peyton Sari.
Peyton, Marcus, and Harry had all scavenged together. But Marcus says Peyton had a recent falling out with Harry.
20-year-old Peyton Sari believed that Harry had stolen his snowboard.
Peyton was very, very mad, according to Marcus. Is this something that he would kill Harry over?
So we go to Peyton's house, and we talk with his family, and his family tells us that they haven't noticed anything unusual about Peyton at all since Harry was murdered. We start to learn more about Peyton. He's a First Nations male. We learn that Peyton was removed from his original home by Child and Family Services, and at the age of 4, he was adopted by the Sari family.
He's never been charged with anything at all. It wasn't the most stable upbringing for Peyton, but there was really nothing that outstanding.
After speaking to Peyton's family, the Mounties return later to speak to Peyton himself.
Peyton tells us that he does know Harry, and that he and Harry have been going through people's garbage, and they look for items that have some value so that they can sell them to other people. He tells us he has nothing against Harry, and the last time he saw Harry was on December 22nd, when Harry offered to pay him $20 to help take some stuff to the dump. He says that the last time he saw Harry, he was alive and well.
Investigators press Peyton on the dispute over his snowboard.
Peyton denied that he ever accused Harry of stealing a snowboard.
Peyton doesn't talk about any disruptions between them. Their relationship is totally fine, according to Peyton.
At this point, we have no evidence connecting Peyton to Elsie and Harry. We have a reason to be curious and suspicious, but that doesn't let us arrest anybody. So we just step back from Peyton and continue with our investigation.
Peyton's family did say Harry had an enemy in town, a female by the name of Jessica, who made numerous complaints that he was threatening to kill her.
Investigators also learned that now police consider whether Jessica stopped Harry in his tracks before Harry could make good on his threat to do the same to her. Then returned with his body and truck and killed the loose-end witness, Harry's Aunt Elsie.
So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, if we have a lady who's claiming that Harry Jones threatened to kill her, that's pretty interesting.
We met with Jessica, and she tells us about a confrontation between her and Harry.
Jessica told me that she had seen the chain link fence locking a bedroom door from the outside, and she was very concerned that maybe Harry was locking Elsie in a room.
Jessica admits she stopped by Elsie's place to confront Harry in person.
Jessica tells us that she talked with Harry and Elsie about this.
Elsie said that was to keep the dogs in that room.
But Harry got upset, and that's where the death threats came from.
She was very fearful. The incident went from her having a concern to the point of Harry actually threatening to kill her, because how dare she accuse him of that? She left the house and stayed away from Elsie and Harry. Jessica went on to say that that's really the last time she's had any interaction with Harry.
Police find Jessica's story credible, and with no hard evidence tying her to the crime scene, they eliminate her as a suspect. But when investigators look into local rumors, they find that Jessica's story is not unique. Harry had a long list of enemies in tiny Ethelbert.
We start to learn that Jessica is just one of many people that's been harassed or threatened by Harry Jones.
The investigators learned that Harry Jones had fought particularly with a man by the name of Reggie Baquet.
Reggie was also interviewed by local media and said that he didn't really think it was strange that Harry would be murdered because Harry was an unlikable person who had extremely strong views.
In one report, Reggie McKay was actually mocking the investigation.
He's seeking the spotlight for a very tragic event for a community. And wondering, why is he saying these things? Why would he do that?
It's not the information or disinformation that these people claim to have that's important. It's who they are to the victim or the suspect. Why have they taken such an interest in this case?
Reggie McKay, his flippant comments raised suspicions among investigators that he may be involved in the murders of Harry.
2 weeks after the double homicide of Elsie Steppa and her nephew Harry in tiny Ethelbert, Manitoba, Royal Canadian Mounted Police suspect a man who's been bad-mouthing Harry in the news. Reggie McKay.
Reggie tells us how much he hated Harry and how Harry was constantly ranting and raving, and it got to the point where he ended his friendship and relationship with him completely. He does say to me that I really didn't like Harry. I didn't like him at all, but I would never kill him.
Reggie says he would never harm Harry's Aunt Elsie either, and adds that he was out of town when they were both killed.
Reggie has an alibi. He was not around during that time period.
As with Peyton and Jessica before, investigators strike Reggie McKay from their suspect list.
And that's when Reggie tells me about another dispute that Harry had with a local resident by the name of Clark Beach. Harry accused Clark of murdering a local in town. Does anyone have enough of an issue with Harry to kill him over these confrontations? Maybe. So now I go looking for Clark Beach. Clark Beach is a local homeopath, and Harry did not take kindly to his naturopathic beliefs. Harry referred to the homeopathic remedies as satanic. Clark Beach felt that he was now being targeted by Harry.
Harry had posted a message on the town bulletin board accusing Clark Beach of murdering a resident with his satanic remedies.
Harry followed up by sending numerous threatening letters to Clark.
Investigators consider the possibility Harry's persistent threats may have driven Clark to violence.
Interpersonal conflicts in general are the number one cause of homicide, so perhaps the threatening behavior was something that Clark wasn't prepared to deal with and so took matters into his own hands.
But Clark insists he never saw Harry as a threat.
Clark tells me, as much as the letters, obviously bothered him, he chose to befriend Harry. He always sort of felt that Harry was an underdog in the community. Clark had an alibi for the time frame that I was now looking at, and I felt pretty confident that he had nothing to do with Harry's murder or Elsie's murder.
With Clark Beach ruled out, investigators aren't sure where to turn next. But in a town of just 300 residents, it doesn't take long for new suspicions to surface. One call grabs the Mounties' attention. The call concerns an earlier suspect, named Peyton.
Conversation that she had with Peyton. It was bothering her a lot since the discovery of Harry's body.
The detectives ask Jocelyn to meet them for an interview.
She tells us that on December 22nd, she and Peyton were at the snack shack. While they're outside in their vehicle, Peyton tells her that he had gone to the dump that day with Harry. And while he was at the dump with Harry, he got into a fight. And that the last time he saw Harry, Harry was still at the dump, and Peyton walked home from the dump. At first, Jocelyn didn't think anything about this. And then when she hears that Harry was murdered, she becomes concerned. When she talks to Peyton about it, Peyton tells her that the whole thing was a lie. It was just a story he made up. He wanted to test her to make sure he could trust her to look after him if he does anything bad.
This, to me, is incredibly compelling. There's something here. Our next step is, let's talk to Peyton again. So we bring Peyton in, and he laughs it off. He says, that was a joke. I made that story up. I wanted to just prank her and just to see if I could trust her if anything ever happened with us. So he kind of confirms what he told to her, but It doesn't sit right, because the story's just getting stranger and stranger.
Investigators asked Peyton the same questions they asked him last time, but now they listened for any changes in his story.
I asked Peyton again when he last saw Harry, and he says, oh, it was about a week before you guys all came to the house. So he's referring to when the bodies were found. He says, yep, I saw Harry driving around that week, just like everyone else said, that truck.
But that's not the story Peyton shared earlier. Previously, Peyton said he hadn't seen Harry since December 22nd at the dump, several weeks before police discovered Harry's body.
It's going to naturally pique investigators' curiosity. But let's face it, people get nervous, uptight, and annoyed frequently having to speak with police investigators. And don't necessarily remember things as they normally would. They often try to remember things as they think they should.
I let him know that you're acting suspicious, and I think you know more or you have something to do with it.
The Mounties have one way to find out.
We ask him to do a polygraph.
To their surprise, Peyton agrees and schedules to return in a week. Now investigators consider whether their second hunch about Peyton has once again led them astray, while the real double murderer is still out there somewhere.
We don't have any evidence or anything else suggesting that Peyton is a suspect.
Homicide suspect, Peyton sorry.